Welcome to My Hero 360, a community that features the voices of our heroes who bring awareness and advocacy for health conditions.
This video was developed in partnership with the Hypoparathyroidism Association.
Michele Rayes, welcome to My Hero 360.
Thank you.
So we're going to talk today about your health journey. You were diagnosed with thyroid cancer at 23 and underwent surgery, which resulted in a subsequent diagnosis of hypoparathyroidism. First, can you share a bit more about your cancer diagnosis? You were diagnosed at such a young age, which I imagine was scary and difficult to confront.
Yeah, of course, anytime I think you hear the word, the C word, the cancer word, it's scary. There's a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions. And I think especially for me, A, because I was young, and B, because when I was going through my diagnostic journey, I had been sick over a year and kept being dismissed for various reasons. But one of the things I distinctly remember them saying when they finally decided they were going to do a scan and an ultrasound was, don't worry, you're too young to have cancer. And at that time, I took that at face value, didn't realize that now I know, with aging that children get cancer. Nobody's too young to get cancer. So when I first heard the words, I was like, really upset just because I was like, they told me I was too young for this, not to expect this, that it was going to be something else. So that's kind of how my journey began. So yes, it's time to even get to the point where they would test me. And then finally got those words and a lot of emotions that went along with that.
Yeah, I can imagine. And that's definitely concerning that you would be told, oh, it's definitely not this, only to turn out that it is. That's just not a way you want to have your medical experience, happen. And so after you had surgery, to remove your thyroid and subsequently found out that you now had this lifelong condition as a result of the surgery called hypoparathyroidism. So how did you come to understand that diagnosis and how did you learn about that?
Well, in my many years speaking about my disease state, I will say that I have said often I felt like I was lucky in some ways because I hear so many people, months or years after the surgery, even though it's a known side effect of this type of surgery, that they didn't have a firm diagnosis or they went untreated and ended up with some serious complications. I feel like I was lucky because the day after my surgery, they knew my calcium tanked, but I will say hindsight is I was lucky that I had a name to the diagnosis, but I didn't know. I didn't have any clue back then what that meant. Nobody explained it to me. I was probably still undertreated. So they told me you have hypoparathyroidism. At the time, there was no Google. I didn't look it up. I went with whatever my doctor said, and he said, you're going to take one calcium pill a day and you're going to lead a perfectly normal life. So hindsight now, 30 years later, I know that that's not true. It's not one pill a day. It's not a simple life. And there was so many things, even after I figured out more about the disease, once I got more involved in my own healthcare, I realized now there was a lot of things that I experienced in that time frame that I didn't realize were related to the disease. I kept thinking, God, I have the worst luck. Now I've got this. Now I've got that. Now I'm tired all the time, or now this. And I had no idea that it was because I wasn't being properly treated for hypopara.
Right. So for people who haven't, like you, when you're diagnosed, haven't heard of the condition, how would you describe it to people?
A lot of times the things that the patients are feeling is tingling, kind of feels like when your leg goes to sleep, only it can happen all over your body. A lot of numbness, muscle cramping. Those are the major, like, everyday type symptoms, and a lot of fatigue. Something I didn't learn until many, many years into my diagnosis. Over time, I developed severe anxiety, and I just thought, oh, great, got another disease. it turns out that PTH controls mood, depression, anxiety. And so the lack of it, and the longer you have a lack of it, the worse your anxiety becomes.
Right.
Again, something nobody told me
Mhm.
about the disease. And if you're undertreated, you can end up with things like seizures or a heart attack. So the disease can be very serious and very debilitating. It doesn't have to be, though, if you're properly treated. What I want the general public to know is when you are lacking PTH, it's not as simple as people think of it as a calcium disorder, but it's not. It's a lack of PTH disorder. And people think, oh, well, if you just ate more calcium in your diet, you'd be fixed. No, that's not how it works because without the PTH, my body can't absorb the calcium properly. So I could take 40, 50. At one point, I was taking 60 pills a day. Like I could take that many pills and my body just isn't absorbing it. It wouldn't matter how much it was in my diet. It wouldn't matter what else I did. It's just not how it works.
Mhm.
But every muscle in your body needs calcium to function, including your heart. And so it's very important that we feed those organs properly.
Mhm. And so you were diagnosed at a very young age and not at the more typical age, let's say, that people may be diagnosed with this condition. So you've lived with it
Correct.
for quite a while. How, over that long-term period, has it impacted you? You talked about the anxiety, fatigue. Just how have you lived with and learned to live with the condition over those years?
I think partially maybe I learned to live with it because I thought I don't have a choice. I've got bills to pay. I've got a family to take care of. Um, Something you'll see in a lot of my interviews is I often say I had this disease before marriage, before children, and kind of before life. I've had, like you said, I've had it a lot longer than most post-surgical patients. Now, obviously, our genetic patients have it a lot longer. But it affected me because it's not a normal, I'm a mom and I have little ones fatigue when I talk fatigue. I could have got up an hour ago and I'm so tired I can't move. But it's also about the muscle disability that it causes. And there was times in my life when my 4 and 5 year old had to help me walk and stand. I'd be at a school assembly and I couldn't get myself out of the chair. And it's really sad when you reflect back and go, my children shouldn't have had to bear that responsibility, but they did. But they began to recognize my symptoms before I recognized my symptoms. And if I was slow to react, they would automatically, naturally come over and assist me to stand up. And while it sounds like heartwarming, it's it's sad that their lives were forever affected. Although I do want to say, um, in the case of my oldest daughter, I didn't realize until she went to college how it affected her, but it was heartwarming to read her college entrance essay. And she wrote about how she decided what she wanted to be in life based on what she saw me go through. And she wanted to develop a drug that would help people like her mother.
Wow.
And so that's how she decided what she wanted to go into.
That's really sweet. And I imagine it helps your children perhaps have more empathy towards other people who are living with health conditions because they saw it firsthand. They saw the effects of it and can understand that it affects the whole
Absolutely.
family, right?
It does. And that's the thing is it affects the whole family. For a long time it affected my ability to work. And there was points in my life where my husband and I barely with two checks made life, but we had to make some tough decisions at times. What's more important, my health or, trying to figure things out or tightening the budget.
Yeah.
Um, and also, everybody has to support. Well, I shared a little bit about my children. My husband had to, there would be times he would have to pick up the slack and, he'd work full time and then have to take care of the kids. I think in every family it should be a shared responsibility. I feel like he had to pick up more than his fair share sometimes.
Yeah. And that's probably something people with a chronic condition can relate to you on is just how um, it presents itself throughout the course of your life and how you have to make decisions about things unrelated to your health based on your health, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's very important to remember it doesn't matter whether I have hypopara or lupus or myasthenia gravis. It doesn't matter what your chronic or rare disease is. There are a lot of things that we, as rare disease patients, share in common, and that would be one of them is how it affects the quality of our life, how it affects our families, and how it affects how we are able to be a productive member of society. And sometimes you feel like a burden on society. And that's a whole nother issue that we have to deal with as rare disease patients.
Yeah, very complex, a lot of different facets of navigating a health journey. You mentioned treatment a little bit earlier, how people think you can just eat your way out of it, right? Eat the right minerals and the calcium, and for a long time, the standard of care has been supplementation of vitamins and minerals. But recently, in 2024, the FDA approved a treatment specifically indicated for hypoparathyroidism. Seems pretty difficult to believe that a condition that you've had, right, you've lived with, and many other people have, just recently got a treatment approved for it. So, can you talk about the treatment itself that was approved, but also kind of your feeling on how did it feel to see this, group that you're in, this community finally get a specific treatment available?
Yeah. So, standard of care, which was for those that don't know, was over-the-counter calcium, over-counter vitamin D coupled with a prescription vitamin D, because there is two different types of vitamin D in your body. And it, like I said, it turned into a lot of pills a day for most of the population. We were told for years that it's because PTH is a finicky hormone, is part of it. So it was hard to develop a drug that was stable. Um, I think it's also because just like other non-hypopara patients in the world, physicians themselves didn't get a lot of education about parathyroid hormone and how much it's responsible for in your body. And so they didn't really believe that we needed to treat more than just the calcium, even though it is more than just a calcium disorder. So when it finally came, I will say I was an early adapter. I actually found out about the clinical trials, and when I heard, I was literally on clinicaltrials.gov every day going, did it go live yet? Did it go live yet? Did it go live yet? And the first day it went live, I jumped on, and am happy to say that I was able to be on the drug for several years before it came to market in 2024.
Wow.
And so I think even more so by then, I was involved in the Hypopara Association. And so to know what it had done for me and how much it had changed my life, that day when it came to market was just so wonderful to know that now so many more people in my community were going to be able to benefit from this medication.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just this overwhelming, amazing feeling to know that so many people were going to be able to see the life changes that I had, and the life that I had known for 20 some years was drastically different after it.
Now, you said you were involved in the clinical trial, which is amazing. It's so
Yeah.
important that people, participate in clinical trials because it makes treatments available for different conditions. So
Right.
ask you about that because I think sometimes people can have a fear, a misperception about clinical trials that it's experimental or last line, therapy. What would you want to share or maybe correct about people's understandings of clinical trials?
So I do think a lot of people think that clinical trials are for only for cancer patients. I've heard that, or they are a last line of therapy, last ditch hope. And in some ways, I did feel like I was on my last hope, like I was in kidney failure by the time I found this drug. I had so many side effects from the long-term effects of this disease that I kind of felt like that, but I don't want it to make it seem like I was as bad as, I was dying, or I'm as bad as a cancer patient. I'm not trying to convey that at all. But I do think that there is this misperception. There is no drug prescription drug that is available in America that gets there without a clinical trial.
Mhm.
And we want those clinical trials because it proves safety, it proves efficacy. And we want that. We want them to be safe and effective. I
Mhm.
will say though that it is not for everyone.
Sure.
You are setting yourself up to be a scientific experiment. So I don't want to there's this perception that, oh, wait, it's wonderful and she got the drug and she's amazing, because that's not always going to be the case. Unfortunately, some people have to be on a placebo, which means they're not really getting the drug. Eventually, they will get the drug. Most trials, I haven't heard of one yet that they don't get the real drug, but maybe there's one out there. Most trials, there's a period of time where they have to be on the placebo and then they're guaranteed to get the drug. Usually it's after 6 months, but that's a long 6 months where your body's being played with and you're having ups and downs and you think you have it and then you think you don't have it. And then it's a mental thing. And so I think if you're not in the mental space to be on the placebo, or you're not in the mental space to have to go for weekly visits or whatever the trial requires, then maybe it's not right for you. Um, I will say I jumped in feet first and didn't even ask like how many visits are required and what is this going to take for me to do. I just thought it doesn't matter at this point. I'm going to do whatever it takes. And so I would caution people before they go in to make sure you ask all the questions and be really prepared mentally for it.
Mhm. That's some really good feedback for people to understand about clinical trials. Of course, nothing is without risk, right? And certainly there are some people who may be in a better place in their life or their health journey where they can, take on that opportunity. And so it's great to hear your first person, real world experience with that. And so once the drug, became approved, and now you said you were an early adopter, you were on the clinical trial, but there's always early adopters, and now it's been out, and available for about a year and a half. Um, how would you say this treatment, palopegteriparatide, is influencing the patient community and the field of hypoparathyroidism?
Well, in the beginning, I mean, we had a lot of our, more complicated patients jumping on. They're early adopters. And even now, there's still people though who are like, ooh, I don't know. And some of the reservation is because it is an injectable. And so a lot of people are afraid. They're like, I want to give myself a shot every day. Um, I would say to those people, the shot doesn't hurt. Most days I don't even feel it. And it's risk benefit, and the benefit far outweighs that little tiny pinch every day. But I do understand. But I would say about 6 months in, we noticed a huge change in the conversation around it and the acceptance of it, and not just from the patients. And I think this is more important than from the patients, is that the doctors are starting to change their tone. We're
Mhm.
not completely there yet. Don't get me wrong on this. There's still a lot of work and education to be done, but we are hearing a difference when we set up booths at physician conferences. Before we would hear, my patients are doing fine, or their numbers are always fine. But just because your patient's numbers are fine doesn't mean they feel fine. Are you really having those honest conversations with them about how it's affecting their daily life? But we're starting to return about, wow, I put one patient on it and I didn't think the rest of my patients needed it, but there's been such a difference. I think maybe I should try it. Or now that I'm hearing all this noise, I'm starting to realize there's a lot of things that I didn't think were related, which patients have been saying for a long time. This is related, but now doctors are starting to realize PTH is a lot more complex than what they knew. And it's not only benefiting more patients having their doctors offer the drug to them, it's bringing forward more research, because now we're seeing some doctors going, you know what, maybe we need to do research about what this disease is actually doing to their bones or to their brain or how it affects anxiety. And so while the research isn't done yet, it's got started, which is more than we had a year and a half ago.
Yeah, that's an important point. It's not just about the patients, it is about the doctors because it does take two to, make a treatment plan happen. And as you said, it also raises interest and awareness of future research. And I know there are a few different treatments that are in development, in different phases of clinical trials. What is kind of your hope for the future of treatment for yourself and just hypopara patients in general?
Well, I think it's very important that we don't hang our hats on the one treatment. While it's great for me, it's not great for everyone. And we've already seen there are some patients who don't do well on it. And that's for various reasons, whether they have comorbidities, which means other diseases that affect the way they can take this medication, whether they maybe didn't need as much to begin with, and this sends them now into a hypercalcemic situation, which is no fun either. Or maybe they're allergic to one of the components that the drug is made out of, and they had a reaction to it. So there always needs to be at least one other choice. Um, and because there is still so much we need to learn about our disease and how the PTH plays a part and how the receptors play a part, I think there's room for other medications that interact with other parts of the body better or differently. Um, and then exciting that there was work on targeted therapies. So we talked a lot about me being post-surgical, and most of our patients are post-surgical, but there are genetic patients, and their bodies are handling the disease differently based on whatever genetic mutation they have. And right now, there's in the works our first targeted therapy for a very specific genetic form. There's 26 genetic forms of this disease, and one of them has the potential in the very near future to have a therapy just for their specific type, which is super exciting.
Now hold on, Michelle's story isn't over. Catch part 2 now.